The letter came to the house on a Tuesday in late March, slipped through the mail slot along with a cable bill and a grocery circular, and Sarah Brennan never once laid eyes on it. She was 17. She was at debate practice that afternoon, arguing the affirmative on a resolution about federal education funding with the kind of ferocious, joyful precision that made her coach lean back in her chair and smile. And by the time Sarah walked in the back door that evening, damp-haired from the rain, her father had already read it twice, folded it along its original crease, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket like a man concealing evidence. It would be 12 years before she learned that Stanford University had accepted her that spring with a full ride. Tuition, room, board, books, the whole architecture of a life she hadn't yet let herself fully imagine, and that her father had picked up the kitchen phone 2 days later, dialed the admissions office direct line printed at the bottom of the letter, and told a stranger 3 time zones away that his daughter had changed her mind. He forged her signature on the decline form himself. He'd practiced it twice on a legal pad first, comparing it against an old permission slip from her sophomore year science trip, getting the loop of the *S* right before he committed it to the form in blue ballpoint and faxed it back before dinner. 12 years after that, Sarah walked into a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown Chicago office tower as the newly named vice president of operations for a company with facilities in a dozen states, and found her father sitting at that same table, waiting to report to her. But to understand the particular, terrible elegance of that moment, you have to go back to the beginning, to a modest split level on a quiet street in Naperville, Illinois, where the Brennan family lived in a house that always smelled faintly of her father's coffee and the industrial hand soap he brought home from the plant in his coat pockets without meaning to. Richard Brennan had worked 28 years at the same regional manufacturing firm, rising with the patient, unglamorous persistence of a man who believed loyalty was itself a kind of virtue, who distrusted anyone who changed jobs more than once a decade, who measured a life not by what it reached for, but by how tightly it held on to what it already had. He'd married Diane Young. He'd loved her in his rigid, undemonstrative way, and when she died of cancer the September Sarah turned 9, something in him seemed to seal shut, like a door bolted from the inside during a storm. After that, it was just the two of them, father and daughter, in a house too quiet for its square footage. He raised her alone. He worked long hours and never complained about it, not out loud, though the exhaustion sat visibly in his shoulders by Friday evening. He provided the lights stayed on, the refrigerator stayed full, the tuition for the local Catholic grade school got paid on time every single month, and in return, without ever once articulating it as a transaction, he expected gratitude, obedience, a particular, narrow kind of daughter. The rules of the house were never spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. Sarah absorbed them the way children absorb the temperature of a room. She would do well in school, but not so well that it drew uncomfortable attention. She would go to college, of course she would. Everyone went to college now, but not far, not somewhere that required a plane ticket instead of a tank of gas. She would be successful, in whatever quiet, containable form success was permitted to take, but never in a way that made her father feel, even for a moment, small. The one person who ever told her otherwise was her mother's younger sister, Judith, a university professor living out in Boston, a woman with reading glasses perpetually pushed up into short gray hair, and a laugh that took up more room than her father was comfortable with. Judith visited twice a year, at Christmas and for a week each summer, and she called on Sarah's birthday without fail, and she sent books, actual books, mailed in padded envelopes, novels and essay collections that had nothing to do with any school curriculum, and she asked Sarah questions nobody else in her life seemed to think to ask. What do you want, Sarah? Not what makes sense. What do you actually want? You are capable of anything, Judith told her once, on the back porch during a July visit, both of them watching fireflies rise out of the grass. Sarah was 12. She held onto that sentence the way other kids held onto a favorite stuffed animal, worn soft from handling. Richard did not like Judith. He never said so in front of her. He was, if nothing else, a scrupulously polite man in company. But after she left each visit, the house would go quiet in a specific, brittle way. And once, when Sarah was 14, she heard him mutter to no one in particular, clearing the dinner plates, that Judith put ideas in her head. He wasn't wrong. He simply never understood that the ideas had been there all along, waiting for someone to give them permission to exist out loud. The evidence of the coming collision had been there for years, if anyone had cared to read it as a pattern instead of a series of isolated moments. In 8th grade, Sarah scored in the 99th percentile on the state standardized exams, high enough that the school counselor personally called Richard to congratulate him. "She works hard," he'd said into the phone, and that had been the whole of his pride, delivered to a stranger instead of to her. When Sarah came home that afternoon, flushed and hopeful, clutching the results like they were something precious, he'd glanced at the page and said, "Don't let it go to your head." She said she just wanted to tell him. He said, "Grades aren't everything," and went back to the newspaper. She stopped bringing him her report cards after that. She stopped bringing him much of anything. Freshman year, she joined the debate team, on a dare from a friend, initially, and then out of something that surprised her, a hunger she hadn't known she had for the architecture of a good argument, for the electric moment right before you land the point that changes the room. She won her first tournament 3 months in and came home with a small trophy still warm from her hand, gripping it the whole car ride. Her father looked at it on the kitchen counter, the way you'd look at an unfamiliar object left behind by a guest. "You're spending a lot of time on this," he said. "I like it. Make sure your grades don't slip." Her grades never slipped. She held a 4 through 4 years of near-weekly tournaments, and if that fact registered with him at all, he never once said so. Sophomore year, her coach, a sharp, warm woman named Mrs. Alvarado, who had a gift for seeing exactly what her students were too afraid to say about themselves, pulled her aside after a Saturday practice, the gym still ringing faintly with the sound of chairs being stacked. "You have real talent, Sarah. You should be thinking about top-tier schools." "I don't know if my dad would want that." Mrs. Alvarado studied her for a moment, the kind of look that felt like being seen all the way through. "What do you want?" "I want to go somewhere that challenges me," Sarah said, and the words surprised her, coming out of her own mouth for the first time. "Then start preparing," Mrs. Alvarado said simply, and something in Sarah's chest lit up like a pilot light catching. She began, quietly, to build a second life alongside the one her father could see. She researched Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, Yale names that felt, at first, almost embarrassing to say to herself, too large, too far outside the frame of what a Brennan was supposed to want. She studied scholarship structures late at night with her bedroom door closed. She prepared for the SAT with borrowed practice books from the library, timing herself against the microwave clock in the kitchen after her father had gone to bed. None of it, not one piece of it, did she share with him. She already knew, with the flat, unspoken certainty children develop about their parents' limits, exactly what his answer would be. Junior year, she sat for the SAT and scored a 1,560. She retook it in the fall, half out of perfectionism and half out of some deeper need to be undeniable, and scored a 1,580. She finished second in her graduating class. She captained the debate team to a state semifinal. She volunteered 9 hours a week at a legal aid clinic downtown, taking 2 buses to get there, filing paperwork for tenants facing eviction, absorbing without quite realizing it a whole education in what it looked like when systems failed the people who trusted them. She was, by any measure that mattered to an admissions committee, building a resume that could open any door in the country. Her father never asked about any of it. He assumed, in the comfortable, unexamined way people assume things about paths they've never bothered to question, that she would follow him to the University of Illinois, 40 minutes down the highway, the way water follows the shape of whatever channel it's given. Senior year, in near total secrecy, Sarah applied to 8 schools: Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Northwestern, the University of Chicago, University of Illinois as a fallback, and DePaul as a second fallback. She used the school's mailing address for all her correspondence. She asked Mrs. Alvarado to serve as her faculty contact so nothing would ever arrive at the house in an envelope her father might open first. She wrote her essays after midnight, the desk lamp turned low, the house silent around her except for the occasional groan of the furnace, describing, in language she was still learning to trust, a girl who wanted more than the life that had been quietly assigned to her. She submitted everything before the December deadlines, and then simply waited, carrying the secret through Christmas, through a birthday, through months that must have felt, in retrospect, like holding her breath underwater. The acceptances started arriving at the school in late March. Mrs. Alvarado called her into the office one Thursday during lunch, and Sarah knew from the older woman's face, the barely contained brightness of it, before a single word was said. "You got into Stanford," Mrs. Alvarado said. "Full ride." Sarah sat down hard in the chair across the desk. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Alvarado slid the letter across to her, and Sarah read it twice, her hands trembling faintly against the paper, tuition and room and board and books all accounted for, all covered, an entire future rendered suddenly, dizzyingly possible. She started to cry quiet, astonished tears, the kind that come when something you've wanted so badly you were afraid to name it out loud finally, actually arrives. "You did this," Mrs. Alvarado said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "You earned every bit of this." "I need to tell my dad," Sarah said, wiping her face, already rehearsing it in her head. "He's going to be so proud of you." "I hope so," Sarah said, and some small, wary part of her, the part that had spent 17 years learning the exact shape of her father's disapproval, did not entirely believe it. That night she made dinner. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, his favorite, the meal she reserved for when she needed something from him, though she wouldn't have named it that way even to herself. He came home from the plant tired, his tie already loosened, and ate in the unhurried silence that had become the default rhythm of their meals together. She waited until his plate was nearly empty. "I need to tell you something," she said. "What?" "I applied to colleges," a breath, "more than just U of I." He set his fork down slowly, the tines clicking once against the plate. "Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted options." "You have options," he said, in the flat, reasonable tone he used when he believed he was being generous. "You can go to Illinois, you can live at home, you can save money." "I got into Stanford," she said, and watched the words land. He went very still. "Stanford." "With a full scholarship, full ride dad, tuition, housing, everything." "California." He said it the way another man might say prison asterisk. "Yes." "That's across the country." "I know." His jaw tightened, and something moved behind his eyes that she would only later, with the clarity of distance, recognize as fear dressed up as authority. "You're not going." "What?" "You are not going to California. You're staying here. You're going to U of I." "Dad, this is Stanford." Her voice cracked upward, disbelief overtaking her. "This is a full ride. This is everything I have worked for." "I don't care." He stood, chair scraping back. "You are not leaving." "Why?" "Because I said so." His voice had risen now, filling the small kitchen. "Because I am your father. Because you do not need to fly to California to get an education." "This is my life," she said. "You are 17 years old." He was standing over her now, and she made herself stay seated, made herself not shrink. "You don't have a life yet. You do what I tell you." "I'm going," she said, and heard, even as she said it, how thin her own courage sounded stretched that far. "If you go," he said, low and final, "you go without my support, without my help. You go alone." "Then I'll go alone." "We'll see about that," he said, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her at the table with a plate of cooling meatloaf and hands that would not stop shaking. She called Mrs. Alvarado that night, voice unsteady, and told her everything. "Don't let him stop you," Mrs. Alvarado said, fierce in a way Sarah had never heard from her before. "You don't have to fight him. You just have to say yes to Stanford and let the rest happen around you." The next day, at lunch, the office called her out of the cafeteria. Her father was on the line. She picked up the receiver in the front office, the secretary pretending not to listen 3 feet away. I called Stanford, he said without preamble. What? I told them you're declining. The floor seemed to tilt under her. You can't do that. I already did. I'll call them back. I'll fix it. It's done, he said. They have it in writing. What are you talking about? Her voice had climbed into a register she didn't recognize as her own. He hung up. She ran to Mrs. Alvarado's classroom between periods, tears already streaking her face before she'd gotten a full sentence out. He called Stanford. He told them I declined. He can't do that without your signature. Mrs. Alvarado's expression had gone hard, focused, the look of a woman rolling up her sleeves. He must have forged it, Sarah said, and even as the words left her mouth, she knew, with the sick certainty of a person recognizing a pattern they'd been trained their whole life not to see, that it was true. Mrs. Alvarado got Stanford's admissions office on the phone that same afternoon, laid out the situation in careful, professional sentences. The counselor on the line confirmed that yes, a signed decline form had come in by fax that morning. That signature was forged, Mrs. Alvarado said. This student earned that spot fairly, and someone stole it from her. The counselor said they would need to investigate. Mrs. Alvarado said, please, this student had earned this. The investigation stretched across 2 weeks that felt, to Sarah, like living inside a held breath. Her father barely spoke to her during that stretch. He went to work. He came home. He ate dinner in a silence so total it had a texture to it, a weight. She matched him silence for silence, and the house, once merely quiet, went genuinely cold. Stanford called Mrs. Alvarado back at the end of the second week. The signature, they confirmed, did not match the one on Sarah's original application. They were prepared to reinstate the offer, but the acceptance deadline had already passed while the investigation ran its course, and the spot had, in the intervening days, been extended to another student on the wait list. They were sorry. Sarah could reapply the following year. They'd be glad to consider her again. Mrs. Alvarado told her in the office after school, gently, watching her face for the break that didn't come. Sarah sat very still and said, "Okay. We can appeal this. We can fight it." "No. Sarah, this is your future." "I know," Sarah said, and something in her voice had gone hollowed out, exhausted past the point of fighting. "But I can't fight him anymore. I'm too tired." She went home that evening, and without telling her father any of it, not the reinstated offer, not the missed deadline, not the fact that the thing he'd destroyed with a forged signature had, for one brief window, come back to life and died again through nobody's fault but his, she accepted the offer from the University of Illinois. She let him believe he had won. It was, she would understand only years later, the first purely strategic decision of her adult life. To give him the appearance of victory while quietly, permanently, closing a door inside herself that he would never again be allowed through. She commuted to campus that fall, living at home, studying business by day and returning each evening to a house where she and her father moved around each other like two strangers assigned to share an address. Sophomore year, she moved into an apartment near campus with 2 roommates. She told him she was leaving. "Fine," he said, not looking up from the television. She packed her own boxes. He did not carry a single one to the car. She worked 2 part-time jobs to cover rent. Took out loans she budgeted with grim precision, and graduated 4 years later with honors in supply chain management. He did not attend the ceremony. She had not, in the end, invited him. The years that followed had the steady, unglamorous shape of a life being built one deliberate brick at a time. Logistics coordinator at a mid-size manufacturing firm in Chicago, modest pay, genuinely interesting work. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask. She volunteered for the projects nobody wanted. She stayed late without being asked to. At 24, senior coordinator. At 26, logistics manager. At 28, recruited by a national manufacturing company with facilities across 12 states, offered a position as regional operations manager. A company that turned out, though she didn't learn this until she'd already signed, to be the very same firm where her father had spent nearly 3 decades on the floor of the Naperville plant. She was placed at the downtown Chicago corporate office. He remained out in Naperville. Their paths, for 7 years, simply did not cross. She excelled there in a way that had less to do with ambition than with sheer, quiet relief at finally being somewhere her work spoke entirely for itself. She streamlined broken processes. She cut costs division heads had assumed were fixed. She improved delivery times enough that her name started appearing, unprompted, in other departments' meetings. Promotion followed promotion. At 30, Director of Operations for the Midwest region. At 32, Senior Director. At 34, under consideration for Vice President. Across all of it, 12 years passed in which Sarah did not speak to her father. She did not return to the house in Naperville. She did not call on his birthday. She sent no card at Christmas. She had erased him from her life with the same cold, methodical thoroughness he had once used to erase her future. And if there was a symmetry in that, a kind of justice with teeth, she allowed herself, on the rare nights she thought about it at all, to feel it without apology. At 35, Sarah was named Vice President of Operations. The announcement went out company-wide. Her photo appeared on the internal site, her bio in the employee newsletter, her name suddenly attached to a title that put her in a direct reporting line to the COO, overseeing 6 regional directors and roughly 400 employees spread across a dozen states. Her first week in the role, she was required to attend a quarterly performance review with all regional managers, held in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of the Chicago headquarters. She walked in 3 minutes early, folder in hand, and found 12 people already seated around the long table. Her father was one of them. He looked up as she entered. She watched the color drain out of his face in real time, watched his hand still on the coffee cup he'd been lifting to his mouth. He said nothing. She said nothing either, not a flicker, not a beat of hesitation, and walked to the head of the table and took her seat as though the man 3 chairs down were a stranger she'd never once shared a kitchen with. "This is Sarah Brennan, our new VP of Operations," the COO said, gesturing toward her with the easy warmth of a man introducing a rising star. "Please give her your full cooperation." The room applauded politely. Her father did not clap. His hands stayed flat on the table in front of him, and he did not lift his eyes from some fixed point on its surface for the better part of an hour. The meeting proceeded exactly as any meeting would. Sarah reviewed performance metrics across all 6 regions. She asked pointed, well-prepared questions. She gave feedback in the clear, unemotional register she'd spent a decade learning to command. Her father sat at the far end of the table and said almost nothing, and when the meeting broke and chairs scraped back and the room began to empty, he lingered by the door until it was just the 2 of them and the fatting hum of the overhead lights. "Sarah," his voice came out smaller than she remembered it. She turned, looked at him, really looked, for what might have been the first time in 12 years, at the deeper lines around his eyes, the gray that had overtaken what was left of his hair, the way his shoulders had rounded forward with age in a manner that made him look, absurdly, smaller than the man who had once stood over her in a kitchen and told her she had no life yet. "I didn't know you worked here," he said. "I've worked here 7 years. I didn't know." "There's a lot you don't know," she said, and watched it land somewhere behind his eyes. "Can we talk?" "No." "Please, Sarah." "This is my workplace," she said, each word measured, unhurried. "If you need to speak with me, send a request through the proper channels." "I'm your father." "You're a regional manager," she said. "That's all." And she walked out, heels sharp against the tile, and did not once look back to see his face. Over the following months, Sarah restructured the operations division top to bottom, new performance standards, mandatory quarterly reporting from every regional manager, a rolling schedule of site visits to every facility under her purview. The Naperville plant was on that list, same as any other. She arrived there on a Tuesday in October with her assistant and 2 analysts, professional to the exact degree required and not 1 degree warmer. Her father met them at the entrance in a pressed shirt that looked freshly ironed for the occasion. He gave the tour himself. He walked them across the production floor, presented quarterly reports with hands that weren't quite steady, and he was distant the entire time in a way that had its own strange, bitter formality. He did not once call her Sarah. He called her Ms. Brennan, and she let him. At the end of the visit, they sat across from each other in his office, a room that smelled faintly of machine oil and old carpet, and she reviewed the plant's numbers in front of him without flinching from a single line. "These figures need to improve," she said. "We're doing our best. Your best isn't meeting company standards. We've had staffing issues. Staffing is your responsibility." She let the silence that followed sit exactly as long as it needed to. He said nothing. "You have 60 days to show improvement," she said, and closed the folder. "Understood," he said. She stood, smoothed her blazer, extended nothing beyond the standard courtesy. "Thank you for your time," she said, and left, and did not think about the meeting again until the 60 days had passed. The numbers, when the deadline arrived, had improved only marginally, not nearly enough. She scheduled the follow-up herself, told him plainly that the plant remained underperforming, that he would be placed on a formal performance improvement plan, watched something in his face crack open at the words. "You're doing this because of Stanford," he said. "I'm doing this because you're not meeting expectations. You've been waiting for this, all these years." "I haven't been waiting for anything," she said, and for the first time that day her voice carried real heat, a controlled burn beneath the calm. "I've been building a career. You've been coasting on 28 years of nobody asking you to do better." "I am your father," he said, quieter now, almost pleading. "That stopped mattering a long time ago," she said, and gathered her things, and left him alone in an office that suddenly seemed too large for him. The improvement plan ran 90 days. To his credit, and she noted this the way she'd note any data point, without warmth, the plant met its targets by the end of it. She acknowledged the improvement in a formal written memo, copied to HR, and did not call, did not visit, moved her attention on to the next facility on her list the way you'd turn a page. 2 years after that, her father retired. The company held a small reception in the Naperville break room, sheet cake and a card everyone signed. She was invited, as a courtesy extended to any retiring employee's direct chain of command. She did not attend. She sent, through her assistant, a standard retirement card, the kind HR kept a stack of in a supply closet, signed with her title instead of anything resembling affection. He reached out 6 months into retirement, a letter mailed to her office, her name typed carefully on the envelope by a hand she recognized even in block print. Inside, he wrote that he'd been thinking about the past, that he'd made mistakes, that he'd been afraid all those years ago of losing her, and that the fear had made him do something unforgivable, that he'd been wrong about Stanford, that he was sorry, that he wanted to see her, that he was proud of her, had always been proud of her, in some buried, wordless way he'd never learned how to say out loud. Sarah read the letter once, at her desk, after everyone else had gone home for the evening. She folded it along its original crease and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath a stack of old expense reports, and did not respond. A year later, a second letter arrived. This one said he was sick, lung cancer, stage 3. He wrote that he didn't expect her to care, that he only wanted her to know, that he understood completely if she chose not to see him, and that he would understand that too, the way he understood he had forfeited any claim to expect otherwise. She read it twice. She placed it in the same drawer atop the first. She did not visit. She did not call. She had flowers sent to the house in Naperville with a card that read simply, "Wishing you strength," and left off any number he might have used to reach her. He died 4 months later. She learned of it through a call from his attorney, her name listed in the obituary under surviving family, a single clinical line in a newspaper she never actually read. She did not attend the funeral. She made a donation to the American Cancer Society in his name and took nothing from the estate. She told the attorney plainly that she didn't want it and meant it. The attorney called again a week after the funeral. There was a final letter, he explained. Her father had left explicit instructions that it be delivered only after his death, not before. "I don't want it," Sarah said, staring out her office window at the gray autumn skyline. "He asked me to make sure you received it," the attorney said, gently. "That was important to him." "Mail it," she said, and hung up before he could say anything further. It arrived a week later, handwritten, the letters shaking visibly across the page in a way that told her, without needing to be told, How near the end he must have been when he wrote it. Sarah, it began, I was afraid you would leave and never come back. I thought if I kept you close, I wouldn't lose you the way I lost your mother. I was wrong. I lost you anyway. I lost you because I tried to control you. I lost you because I was afraid of your success. I lost you because I could not let you be greater than me. You became greater anyway. I am sorry. I am proud of you. I always was. I just never knew how to say it. I hope you find peace. I hope someday you find a way to forgive me, even if I don't deserve it. I love you, Dad. She read it once, sitting at her kitchen counter with the last of the evening light going gray outside the window. She folded it precisely along its crease. She placed it in the drawer with the others, closed the drawer, and did not cry. She went to work the next morning. She led a meeting. She reviewed quarterly reports. She had dinner with friends that evening, laughed at something one of them said, went to bed at a reasonable hour. She still has the letters. She hasn't opened that drawer in 3 years. She doesn't know even now whether she will ever forgive him, and some nights she isn't certain it matters anymore whether she does. Her life in the years since has become something entirely her own making. She was named Chief Operating Officer at 39, among the youngest in the industry to hold the title. She mentors young women coming up through manufacturing and logistics, sits on 2 boards, speaks at conferences where rooms full of strangers listen to her talk about supply chains and leadership, and occasionally, resilience, though she is careful never to say exactly what that word cost her. She doesn't think about Stanford often anymore. When she does, it isn't with regret. The anger is still there, somewhere underneath everything else she's built, but it has gone distant now, the way an old injury goes distant, an ache that only flares when something presses directly on it. She built a different path. It was harder. It took longer. But every foot of it belongs to her entirely in a way nothing handed to her ever could have.